All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this webinar on improving students' learning outcomes through virtual internship-based teaching. I'm Alan Song, the facilitator for this webinar session and currently serving as part of the ASCILITE executive and organizing this series of ASCILITE webinars this year. Firstly, I would like to introduce you to the facilitators for this afternoon's webinar. They are Dr. Leopold Bayerlein and Mrs Naomi McGrath. Dr. Leopold Bayerlein is a senior lecturer in financial accounting at the University of New England Business School. Leopold has a strong research interest in accounting education and curriculum development, and has received several national awards for his innovative teaching strategies, including the development of this program called Of Balancing Life. Mrs. Naomi McGrath is a learning designer at the University of New England Business School. She has extensive experience in gamification and the development of multimedia-focused learning activities. Naomi's research interests are in the gamification of higher education. Now, both Leopold and Naomi are recipients of this program's recipient of 2015 ASCILITE Innovation Award. Just some housekeeping here. For this afternoon's 1-hour webinar, the facilitators will share for a couple of minutes, and there will be time for activities as well as Q&A session. Now, during the question and answer session, you could either post your question in the chat box or click onto the hand-raising button located on the left, right below the image box, and we'll give you the right to speak. And when speaking, you can click onto the talk button, and after speaking, you can release the talk button again. Now, without further ado, please help me to welcome Leopold and Naomi.
Thank you, Alan. My name's Leopold Bayerlein, and after this great introduction, I'm sure I will try to create a very good webinar for you. What we're going to do today is really to tell you a little bit about ourselves, a little bit about my teaching and the way I used to teach a couple of years ago, which is really the basis for the development that Naomi and I have undertaken over a number of years, and then to tell you a little bit about virtual internship-based learning and our take on the creation of a virtual internship. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to type them into the chat box as well. Naomi and I will try to monitor the chat box, and we'll either answer it by typing back, or hopefully Naomi will interrupt me and voice your question, and then we'll answer that as well. If you have any questions at the end, please also feel free to hold your questions to the end, whatever you prefer. A little bit about myself. As Alan has mentioned, I'm a senior lecturer in accounting at the UNE Business School, located in beautiful Armidale in Australia. I teach about 40% of my students at undergraduate level, and 60% of my students at undergraduate level and 40% of my students at postgraduate level. About 80% of my undergraduate students are international students, and only about 20% are Australian domestic students. So that creates some additional challenges to blend those two very different groups of students. I teach roughly about 180 students per year, and that's spread across 4 classes, 2 at undergraduate, 2 at postgraduate level. As you can guess by all of these percentages, the undergraduate classes are slightly larger than the postgraduate classes. Over the last couple of years, I've been lucky enough to win a number of awards and prizes, and the standouts from my perspective are an OLT, this is the Office of Learning and Teaching in Australia, Teaching Excellence Award in 2014, and that's the picture of me in the middle receiving that award, which is a very nice award to receive because you're invited to Parliament House in Canberra, and you get a nice dinner and a couple of nice speeches. On the left-hand side, you see me receiving the Office of Learning and Teaching citation for outstanding contribution to student learning. And when I put those 2 pictures in, you will notice that I'm wearing the exact same suit in both pictures. So I put a 3rd award on the list and the 3rd picture in just to demonstrate to you that I really do own more than one suit. And the picture on the very right is an award I received in Hong Kong for flexible online learning from the Open University of Hong Kong. But our most recent success for Naomi and me has been our joint ASCILITE Innovation Award, which we are very, very proud of. I will now hand you over to Naomi, who will introduce herself.
Thank you, Leo. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. Well, hello everyone, and thank you again for coming to this presentation. I am a learning designer here at the UNE Business School, and my main role really consists of working with academic staff on teaching strategies and techniques. So I help to develop a more engaging and effective multimedia presence and a teaching environment by helping to design and develop high quality teaching and learning materials. And also with this I conduct professional development activities within the school as well. Basically, with my current research as a PhD student, I'm actually focused on discovering learning and personal interactions and engagement with art using augmented reality and mobile devices in regional and remote art galleries. So I guess you could say I'm a glutton for punishment when it comes to technology, but I love it. And as you can see also, just a few of prizes and awards, a couple obviously were in there from a team approach with other learning designers within the business school. Also an excellent paper award at the ICOF conference, and again here today for the ASCILITE Innovation Award. So that's just a little introduction about me, so I'll leave it there and let Leo continue with the presentation. But as Leo also said, I'll stay in the chat room and try and help answer any questions or even prompt Leo in case there's anything that needs to be addressed through the presentation. So thank you, and I will let Leo take back over. Thank you.
Thank you, Naomi. I should point out that Naomi's role in all of this has really been really instrumental, because if any of you are in academic roles, you will know that sometimes as an academic, you wake up in the morning and you think, I would like to teach my students through this in a particular way. And I've done that many times over the past years, and often I then wander into Naomi's office and say, I decided I would like to try something. And normally Naomi looks at me with a very shocked face initially, but then figures out a way that we can make this work, and I'm really, really grateful for her for that. So as promised, a little bit about the development and the basis why we decided to develop a virtual internship. And for me, all of this comes down to the way I was teaching back in 2011, 2012 really. And for me, teaching falls on a spectrum that's either on the left-hand side very traditional, or on the right-hand side very engaging. And for me, traditional teaching would mean teaching in large classroom settings. You're standing in a big lecture theater with 200 students, or in my case, more like 60 or 70 students. You deliver a lecture, and that's the main form of communication with the students. Yes, the students get some other activities, and there's some practical application processes that happen, but it's really the teacher is the source of knowledge, and the students are there to absorb it. That's where I stood, what I did back in 2011. And through a 3-year process, I moved all of that to a very engaging space, where all of my lectures are now delivered online. I haven't actually given a physical lecture in a lecture theater since mid-2012. My lectures aren't 2 hours online, are not 2 hours long anymore, but are short snippets of 15, 20-minute presentations arranged around individual concepts. And I've changed all my face-to-face time with students to hands-on activities where students work in groups to solve actual real-world problems. So here you might recognize a lot of the flipped classroom approach that is, I think, taking higher education by storm. Now, what I want to point out on this slide is that this process from moving from one end of the spectrum to the other has not been linear. It's not do step 1 and then step, something happened and you do step 2 and step 3 and so on. It's been a trial and error. There have been some successes, but there have also been things that we tried or that I tried, and that didn't work or that created new problems. And so I think it's really important to recognize that for anybody who is engaging on or thinking about going on to a development process to change the way they're teaching or supporting anybody in changing the way they're teaching, anything you do may work or may not work. And even if something doesn't work, there's still a learning experience in that. So how did I used to teach? I think of my teaching as a progression, as a learning activity progression. So how did students engage? What is the process through which students engaged with materials? And originally, as you can see on the slide, in the classroom, I did certain things, and then I have a large number of online students who don't come to the classroom but get materials delivered through our online management, through our online learning management system, which is Moodle. And for them, back in 2011, I tried to recreate a classroom experience. I now understand that that's not a thing that's remotely feasible or useful, but back then I still was of the opinion that that's a good thing to do. So for my in-class students, I would start with a theory lecture. I would present theoretical concepts and then would show them how to apply these concepts in practical examples. So that's the theory lecture and the guided scenario-based application. Guided scenario-based application for me virtually meant I put a example question on the screen, and then the students watched me work out the answer, or we worked out the answer together in class. But the students didn't do much of the working out, they just took notes on how it worked. All of that was recorded. First only a voice recording, and then later in 2012 I switched to a video recording of the presentation screen with a voiceover, so that my online students at home could see or hear what was going on. I then sent my students home with some homework questions, in a sense, where they had to do some self-study, reflect on what they learned in class, and then do self-applications, or solve problems by themselves. Those problems were similar to what they'd had in the guided application, but they had to do it at home. And then in step 3, in-class students came back into the classroom and we did small group tutorials of no more than 25 or 30 students, where the intention was to talk about the solutions that students had created for their homework questions. At the end of that, I always had a little self-test where I gave students 2 or 3 new questions, and I told them, you have to do these questions before I'll let you leave the room. Now that worked for some, didn't work for others. At the end, I can't enforce people not leaving the room, but it was an incentive for them to be at least somewhat prepared. For the online students, they obviously didn't get those tutorials, but they were supposed to do the same homework question, and then about a week after those homework questions were provided to the students, I released just a solutions manual, and those students had text-based discussion forum where they could ask questions or help each other or request information from me. Now, I, at this point, would like you to spend 2 or 3 minutes reflecting on what kind of problems do you think I encountered in this particular teaching approach. Now, we have, as I can see, 9 participants, and I will just split you into 2 separate groups, in 2 separate breakout rooms. And you don't have to do anything, you'll be automatically assigned to a room, but I would ask you, when a new breakout room chat box appears on your screen, please just talk to each other about what problems do you think this style of teaching creates or has. Naomi, Alan, and I will just jump in between the chat rooms and assist you, and then in 3 or 4 minutes we'll just come back and I reveal what kind of problems I did encounter. Okay, so hopefully you've now been split into two separate groups, and I would ask you to start talking. Oops. Okay, I've now returned everyone to one session, and I hope you can all hear me again. If somebody could indicate whether that's the case, that'd be much appreciated. Very good, thank you. So I've looked in some of the chat rooms, and many of the things that you said were actually really spot on. In my theory lectures, I had the problem that I think is inherent in any large class delivery, which was very limited student engagement. And I always tried to be engaging with students. I asked questions, I asked for comments, I asked for input, but as it usually happens, no answers were forthcoming. And I grew very dissatisfied with that because I felt that the lectures became a little bit of a waste of my time, because at the end of the day I feel my talents aren't fully utilized if I stand there and just, you know, present information. An interesting question that occurred very frequently was that after the lecture, some students would come to me and say, your presentation was just so fast that I didn't understand the main concepts. Can't you go a bit slower? And then the next student who came to talk to me after the same lecture would say, well, your presentation was so slow. You just kept on going over the same concepts again and again. Can't you just present faster so that we can cover more content? So I would call this delivery that was too fast and too slow at the same time. And that relates to different student groups. For example, most of my international students have very highly developed numeric skills, whereas many of the Australian students struggle with simple math concepts. So I had to go over simple math concepts for the Australian students that all the international students found really very boring, because for them that was plainly obvious. The limited student engagement and the too fast, too low, too slow delivery then resulted in very low attendance. So I typically started with something like 90% attendance in week 1, and after our 12-week teaching period, I ended up with something below 50%. For the self-study, self-application, the homework component, if you will, students reported that they have difficulty doing it. They just didn't know where to start with the question. They got stuck at a particular issue and didn't know how to resolve it, and then simply gave up. Now, talking to students after a number of interactions with them, I came to believe that that really was a problem that came from a lack of foundation knowledge. Students may have understood the concept I was talking about in class, but didn't understand basic accounting issues, basic accounting concepts, basic accounting processes, and hence couldn't put what they've learned in class into action. Because of difficulty doing it, not really knowing how to, students simply didn't do the work that I assigned them at all. And I shouldn't say that's true for all students, but about half of them didn't do any preparation before they came to class. When then students came back to our tutorials where we were supposed to discuss solutions, given that a large number of them hadn't actually done the preparation, well, they were not prepared. All of the students who were not prepared had very limited engagement, and it created a situation that I would call students take the answers and run. So I had students who come and sit in class for an hour, and any attempt to engage them in conversation, in discussions about answers was unsuccessful, and the only thing they ever said during the hour was, "Can I have the solutions, because I want to go home now." And to me, that became really frustrating, because all of the face-to-face activities had some engagement problem, had an attendance problem, and all of my efforts to be engaging, to talk to students individually, just did not work out all that well. Now here's what we did about it. We changed my whole teaching completely. And by that I mean I changed all materials that I use in my teaching. I changed the concepts that I teach, or at least the order of the concepts that I teach. I still teach the same number of concepts and the same list of concepts, and a completely different teaching style and delivery style. So if you look at my student learning progression now, which is the red information in the middle of the slide, students don't start with theory anymore, they start with problem identification. After their problem identification, they have to do some guided research. So they have to go and find information for themselves that tells them how to solve the problem that they have identified. Then they get some guided application, then some self-application, which is literally solving the problem that they've identified in step 1 with the research that they've done in step 2, using the guidance that they've received in step 3. And at the end, there's a progress check that just checks up on students, have they achieved the key learning outcomes for a particular topic. Every topic that I teach follows that main progression. We've couched all of this in a virtual internship because I came up with the concept of creating an imaginary company, which is called LargeMart, that has imaginary employees. They interact with each other. They produce documents that are sent to each other, and all of the learning materials, all of the resources that the students get is couched in the concept of that company. So my students don't get a set of topic notes, for example, anymore. They get what I call an accounting manual, which is a description of how this particular business does its accounting. The content is very, very similar. It's just worded in a different way to fit into the company concept. So what do students get? Students get what I call an online TV show. And for that, that was a tool to engage students, to hook their attention. So I wrote a little script. I sourced some real actors, and we were lucky enough to get a little bit of financial support from the university to shoot a little storyline that follows a student in his way to get work as an accountant, to become successful in that job. So that the setup is that students are introduced in the first episode to a student like themselves. The student just passed his first year accounting exam, which is exactly what students do before they come to my unit that I teach. And then he goes home and has holidays. And he does what all of our students do. He plays computer games and drinks too much and has a lot of fun. And at some point he runs out of money and he has to find a job to support himself. And he thinks, well, I'm studying accounting, so maybe an accounting job is the right way to go. and he cons his way into becoming an accounting assistant at an electronics store. Unfortunately, he doesn't really know how to do any of the work because, well, he's only a first-year accounting student. And my students then have to help that student solve practical problems that he experiences in the workplace. So in every episode, students are introduced to some interactions at the office, and part of that interaction always is that our students that we follow gets assigned work by a colleague, by his boss, by somebody. And once the video ends, the students who watch the video get a link to exactly the same problems, the same document that was introduced in that video. And they then have to use the online learning resources to do their guided research to solve those problems. Part of that online TV show is also the concept of modeling behavior that I would like my students to adopt. So, for example, our imaginary student gets assigned work and then struggles, how do I do this? And he either looks up information in our company's accounting manual, which is my student's learning management system, or he asks for advice from a colleague, which is the peer-to-peer support that I would like my students to adopt. Or he asks, when the problem is really complex, he asks a consultant. And I play the role of consultant in that video. And I'm in that video to demonstrate to students that if you have a problem, come and ask me. And again, that's something that I do particularly for my international students, because in my experience, they often have a barrier of approaching their teacher for advice, because that has a negative connotation if you ask for advice. And I want to demonstrate to them that it is okay to ask. Our imaginary student does it. I'm always helpful for him. If you come to me and ask a question, I will also be helpful and give you advice. So that's the online TV show. We will have an example of what that looks and feels like on the next slide. So if you're keen to find out, give me 1 minute. After the online TV show, as I said, students get the case study document and have to use information that I present in what I call an accounting manual to solve those problems. Students prepare how to solve these case study questions at home and then come back to a group work environment, which is my tutorials, my face-to-face time, where students work in groups, solve the problems that they've been presented. So that's the group research, group solving of problem aspect. Students also have access to prior re-examples online, where I show them in a video how I would solve similar problems. Again, all of the examples are couched in the language of the business, so they happen at the same business just in a prior year. They're never exactly the same as the problem that the students have to solve, but if students look at 2 or 3 or 4 prior year examples together, they give the students the information that they need to solve the problem that they've been given. At the end, once students have created in groups solutions for the problems that they've been given, they have to go back home and enter their solutions in the learning management system. The learning management system checks their answers. Students need to get 75% correct before they can pass on to the next topic area. And the same process starts again with a little snippet, a little episode of our online TV show. None of those progress quizzes are accessible. They are simply there so that the students are confident that they have mastered the key concepts. Okay. We've tried to play our little video here in the forum, but it didn't work. So at the moment, Naomi has posted a link in the chat room, and I would ask you to click on the link. It's a YouTube link, watch the video, and come back in about 3 or 4 minutes. We'll continue after you've watched the video. Okay, I think most people are back, so we'll continue on. And hang on. Yep. So the intention here was really to make the learning experience for the students more flexible. And when we created the virtual internships, we set out to make them all fully self-paced online study. So for my online students, as I mentioned before, it's designed as a 12-week unit of study, but the fastest student I ever had finished all 12 weeks in the first 3 weeks. And through the progress check quizzes that are in Moodle, that student gets released additional information, the next topic, without impacting on any of the other students. So if you have a student who's really fast and that suits them, that's fine. I've had other students who didn't do anything for the first 3 or 4 weeks, then had a big bout of activity, presumably because they took time off work or had more time on their hands, and then don't do anything for a week or 2. So it's really good to have that flexibility. It is all teamwork enabled, so either on campus or off campus. I encourage, or on-campus students, I force students more or less to work in teams. In the online world, I encourage the teamwork. I don't enforce it, simply because I recognize that my students live in different time zones, have different demands on their personal lives, and I find it very difficult to enforce some sort of, you have to meet once a week to talk about this for an hour, because chances are my online students just don't find an hour per week where they can all join together. We've tried to be very responsive to the needs of individual students and their learning styles. Again, the progress checks help us to do that, because if students don't pass the progress hurdle, there's a little bit of very, very simple learning analytics that identifies what was the issue and sends students back to a suggestion. I think you should look at material X because that will help you to overcome the problem you've had, and please do that and then come back and try again. Students also tell me that they love the instant feedback on their learning tasks, so that they do the task and then immediately type in the results and get the answer and get the yes or no, so they can reflect on what they've just done. And obviously the simulated work experience is a big tick as well. We'll come to some student comments from interviews that I've done with students in a little while. From me as the teacher, it's really good because it allows me to track my student performance, the performance of my students very, very extensively. And for example, in the group work activities in my tutorials that I mentioned before, I try to make a point to talk to every single student in every single week. And in order to do that, I just look at how have they performed in last week's key concept quiz. And if students had problems in a particular area, I have a conversation starter. I can say, well, I noticed that you struggled a little bit with doing X. Is there anything that I can do? Do you have any questions about it? And you can have much more targeted conversations with students than just saying, how is it going? Are you going okay? Because the answer to that will always be, I don't have any problems. But if you say, I think you have a problem, and I think your problem is X, what can we do about it? You can have a conversation that's much more focused. I think what we're doing here, we allow students to create their own knowledge through their own guided research, and we're integrating our online and blended learning into one space. I saw in the chat room before, do online and on-campus students see the same information? Yes, they're in the same learning management shell, in the same system. They see all the same information. And for me, it's really good that there's no programming or any specific IT skills required, because we did everything with standard Moodle functionality. So what do students think? Well, you would think that creating all of this student satisfaction would increase. It hasn't. It stayed about the same. So if you look at the top of the slide, in 2012, the last year before I implemented my virtual internships, I got a student satisfaction score, which I tend to think is fairly meaningless, other than it shows you if your students are happy or not, or 4.85 out of 5, so really, really good. And the year following, or the first year in which I implemented my virtual internships, that went down a little bit. And talking to students, it went down because my expectations of how much time they have to spend engaging with the materials increased substantially. I should add that I never set out to improve my student satisfaction scores. There was never an aim of any of this development. What I set out to do was to improve or reduce attrition, improve pass rate, help students achieve learning outcomes more successfully. And that worked really well. So my attrition in the first year of using virtual internships went down by half. My pass rate went up by 10%. And the mean mark for my students went up by 8%. Now, you would ask, well, was that just because you had simpler or easier assessment tasks? And I was worried about that. So I asked a colleague to do a peer review of my assessment tasks in 2012 and 2013. And the response was that my assessment tasks in 2013 were more detailed and had higher expectations attached than my assessment tasks in 2012. So there is no reduction in content and no reduction in rigor, in a sense. The best outcome for me, and that was quite unexpected as teaching staff, is that students ask me 25% less questions in emails or online discussion forums. There is lots of activity online, but the students help each other. They don't need as much advice from me, and that saves me a lot of time. So I really enjoy that. What do students say? Let's start with the comment on the left-hand side, and that's a comment that a student gave me when I interviewed him for a research project. And he said, this subject told me that I don't want to be an accountant. At the first instance, you think, oh, that's not good. But reflecting on it, I've come to realize it's actually a really, really good outcome, because the student could verbalize why that was the case. He said, I always thought I wanted to be an accountant because I want to run my own business, and I acknowledge accounting is important in that context. But he said, when I came to you and I saw what an accounting workplace would look like, I don't want to do it because there's far too much detail. You have to be careful with everything, and that's not me. I'm an ideas person. I want to be the person who says, here's the great idea, and I want someone else to work with so that they can help me do all the details. So when that student said, you told me that I don't want to be an accountant, it helped him early in his studies to decide he should focus on something else. And for me, that's actually a really good outcome. The other comments are much more what you would expect. They focus around that the story and the setup as a virtual internships really ties the different topics together and shows an integrated whole rather than showing individual topics. And I had one student again in an interview who had a very fascinating story that he had a real internship in the semester break before he came studying my unit. Then he studied with me, and then he had an internship directly after he left my unit. And he said in his first internship, he wasn't sure what was expected of him. When he had problems that he couldn't solve himself, he would go online and try to madly Google solutions. And he felt that he was really inward focused and was just afraid that if he asks a question and says, I don't know how to do this, that it will reflect badly on him. And he said after studying in a virtual internship, the real internship he had straight after, he had the confidence to ask questions, to acknowledge that I don't know how to do this. Who should I talk to help me? And his reflection when I interviewed him, that was 12 months later, was that his second internship was far more valuable for him as a person, for personal development, because he was much more engaged in the work context. Last comment, practical information made me feel confident and I can apply accounting knowledge in the workplace. Yes, that was obviously what I was hoping for. So it's nice that the students, without prompting, would say things like that as well. So how does a virtual internship work? On this slide, I'm just I've used this in a publication about virtual internships, and I've put it in here because I think it displays quite nicely how a virtual internship and a real internship compares. So in an internship, you would have colleagues that work together to solve problems. What I'm trying to do is I have students who are put in a virtualized workplace to work together to solve problems, but their problems are actual learning challenges. And if you create a scenario where the work challenges and the learning challenges are virtually identical, then right at the bottom you also get as an outcome that the solutions for learning challenges are also the solutions for work challenges. So it prepares students for the workplace without having to teach them about workplaces, in a sense, through presentations or site visits or excursions or bringing experts in. So it's much more scalable than many other solutions. Now, looking for key success factors, and I think that's the important part here, because my interpretation of a virtual internship is just that, my interpretation. But I'm doing research at the moment to tease out what are the key things that make the virtual internship work, and can we apply them not just in accounting but in different educational fields and in different contexts, and maybe not with a video story but using a different engagement tool. And this is just a little mind map of how the learner, the virtual internship, which here I called it virtual world, how it all fits together. Now, because I don't want to go through all of this, I've created a little summary document. So whilst the research is not at an end, here's some thoughts on what I think the key success factors are. It works because I'm capturing students' attention during the face-to-face activities. So the flipped classroom teaching works really well if you can create a situation in the face-to-face environment where students see the value of coming to class. I do that by talking to every student in every single class and talking to them in a directed way by using their prior week's results in their progress test as the conversation starter. If a student has achieved full marks, that's great. I can say, well, you did really, really well. You did so well, in fact, that maybe you should also think about how what we learned last week relates to X, Y, and Z, and we can have a conversation around that. I think what I'm doing works because I built very strong links between the online activities and the face-to-face activities. As I said before, students watch the first introduction video for every topic, and then at the end of that little fun activity, which usually lasts for 2 or 3 minutes, get a link to the exact thing that was the exact work problem that was introduced in the video. So that then becomes their face-to-face activity, and immediately you have that link. Requiring students to demonstrate their knowledge of a topic before they're allowed to move on. Students initially hate it, complain about it to no end. But by the time they get to the end of the trimester and get to the exam, they say, well, I really think that helped me because I'm now confident that the things that we're doing now, I can see that they build on what we did in week 2, and I know the things in week 2, so it's all good. They feel more prepared for their further study, for their exams, and for going out into the workplace. And at the end, again, the personal interactions during the face-to-face activities. I want to give some advice on how to make change, and for me this is an example of change, but change could really be anything. How to make that happen. And for me, the key was building a strong relationship with Naomi as my preferred academic developer. And if you have that strong link between an academic developer and an academic, if one side of the two has an idea, they can voice it without concern. You can talk about it. You can either use it or not. But there's no pressure on coming up with something good right now. It develops over time. And again, Naomi and I have done some research around how did we become a successful team. And things that we've identified is building relationships from small projects to larger ones. and establishing trust, not just trust that we are good at what we do, but trust that we would act in the best interest of each other. And that really has improved our relationship and has opened doors for us, like the ASCILITE Innovation Awards that a couple of years ago neither of us thought was possible. The second point I'd like to make is have a clear end goal before you change anything. And a clear end goal for me was knowing how I wanted to teach, but even more important, what I wanted to achieve. You might remember that I said earlier, I never set out to improve my student satisfaction rating. So I don't know how if all of your universities have you know, for each teaching period mandated student evaluations, but for me we do this, but for me they are there. The verbal comments that students provide are interesting, but the rest, I'm not sure how useful it is. So I never set out to improve those scores. I was happy with them before, I'm happy with them now. What I wanted to achieve was helping students to achieve learning outcomes better. That's why I went down the path I went down. If I wanted to improve my student evaluation scores, I would have done something completely different. The last point is to apply for grants or ask for institutional support. And if people say no, ask again. We did this development with minimal financial assistance through a lot of goodwill by a number of key people who volunteered their time to assist us. But I've now come to recognize that other developments of the scale and level that we've done would attract grants probably in the tens of thousands of dollars, and it would have been nice to have that support, and it's obviously nice to have, you know, that grant on your CV as well. So that brings me to the end of my presentation, and if you're a fan of the Big Bang Theory like I am, you will recognize the face that Penny has here, and it says, "What are you talking about?" So any questions? Now is your chance. I know that Naomi has been answering questions on the side, but if there is anything that you would like to ask here at the end, please do.
Okay, thanks, Leo. I think we have a couple of questions that has been posed. So perhaps we could actually address some of the questions that has been asked earlier. One of the questions that came from Francisca was, does this group, you know, that you have actually, they come in different, pace. So, you know, the question is that, does it actually impact the group in terms of the dynamic? Because some may actually go faster, some may go slower. So, how do you address those issues? Thanks.
That's a very good question, Francesca. So for my on-campus students who meet in class every week, they do have the opportunity to be faster, but for them I don't want to say mandate, but very strongly encourage that they stick with a week-by-week plan that I've mapped out for them, because then that gives everyone in the group a minimum level of knowledge. Yes, there are students who come to the group and say, "Oh, I did that 3 weeks ago," and they still participate in the conversation, and yes, they become the leaders of that conversation and the students that other students with more problems refer to. But because I've mentioned those progress quizzes that I have for every topic, I can check that students follow a minimum progression. And if students don't, I talk to them with a very stern face and say, "Well, you know, you should really do this, because otherwise you can't be prepared for this activity now, and it's really not useful for you, and it's really not helpful to your group." So I try to manage it by encouraging students through my personal interactions with them to actually stick to a week-by-week schedule. For the online world, for the students who don't come to class, they can do virtually whatever they like. Again, I encourage them to follow at least the minimum progression that I set out, simply so that when they get to a particular assessment task, they've done all the activities that they need to complete that task.
Thank you, Leopold. We have another question from Bronwyn and Trish. This is related to the condition that the students are working alone. So the question would be, how do we encourage peer-to-peer learning if they are working, to some extent, working alone?
Yes, that's a challenge, absolutely, particularly online. At the moment, I do it by simply assigning a very, very small amount of marks to my students' online activities. So if you're an online student with me, 10% of your mark is based on the extent to which you engage in online discussion and the extent to which you help other students resolve problems. Now there's a rubric attached to that, and basically the rubric focuses on that students make a number of, I can't remember the exact number, and obviously it differs between postgraduate and undergraduate students, a number of postings that are correct, insightful, and help another student to address a specific problem that they have posted. And I then just go through and assess that, and that encourages most students to participate. Now, I don't have I don't ask for students to do one of those a week. From memory, I think for the postgraduates, they should do 8 of such postings in a 12-week period, and the undergraduates, I think I say 5 or 6. But they could all be in the same week, and then the student is done with their online engagement. And I had students who did that right at the beginning and then kept posting. And I asked them, why do you keep posting? I said, well, I'm in the habit of doing it, so why not? Others don't have a lot of engagement at the beginning, and then when an assessment task comes up, are really engaged. So it's a challenge, and I don't have a very, good answer for it, but I think it's a manageable problem.
Okay, thanks. We still have another 5 minutes. Are there anyone who has a question that you would like to ask? You could actually post it in the chat, or you can even ask a question there. Leopold, I have a question here. If anyone who would like to, take this particular model and to try it out in their own course or unit, do you have any advice apart from the 2 slides that you have shared? Any points that you want to share further?
I would say that what I've done here is I've tried to re-envision how I teach in a very, very holistic way. And before I did that, I did smaller improvements to try and address particular issues. And those small improvements I did earlier on focused on giving students better access to information, being more responsive to student questions. So for example, in 1 year, I introduced the guarantee that I would, answer a student question or comment within a 24-hour period. And interestingly, the biggest improvement of student satisfaction I ever had was in the year when I started to tell my students, I will answer your question within 24 hours. Students loved that. Why I'm giving this example is what I've shown here is a fairly complex and work-intensive way of getting to the cutting edge of what's possible. There's many steps beforehand that people can take that are really interesting for the students, really helpful, and that solve a lot of problems. So don't think you have to do something excessively large. Think about the small steps, do a couple of small steps, and then if you're still interested and if you still have time and have a good relationship with your educational developer, go further and explore what's possible on the edge of current technology.
Thanks, Leopold. We also receive feedback from inputs from Naomi in the chat as well. Okay, I think we have come to the end of this session. I just want to once again thank Leopold and Naomi for sharing the insightful, information about the program that we have actually launched and also implemented. And for the rest of us, we hope that you have found the session useful, and we will keep you informed of the webinar schedule in the coming months. So hope to see you at the next ASCILITE webinar, and bye for now.
And